Stop the press. Is the tank canceled? Not quite, but winning a few games never killed anyone.
Your Locked On Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Obviously, tonight we've got some fun stuff. Winnipeg has won their fourth straight game. Tank canceled? Probably not. I think we all kind of know where I stand on things and where a lot of us stand on things, but a little cheeky 4-game win streak can't really hurt. Probably. Making up ground in this league, especially when you were so far behind to begin with, probably not something that I think the Jets are really going to be capable of just yet. Not without the rest of the league kind of falling off a cliff too. We'll talk about the 4-game win streak and this latest win against the Wild. Chat a little bit about which young guns might be a little bit more imminent and who could be a real impact player for the Jets next season. And, answer that question. Is a playoff push really worth it, or is it just a bit of fairy dust? Let's talk about the 4-game win streak, though. Over the past couple of games, the Jets have finally gotten some secondary scoring, something that's been sorely missing for most of the year. A lot of guys who were, basically tootling along at maybe a 2 or 3% shooting percentage have suddenly managed to start lighting the lamp a little more frequently. We've seen assists from guys like Cole Perfetti jump. We've seen the Perfetti, Velarde, Taves line really start to hammer the puck a little more frequently. Taves, again, getting some scoring help recently in the past couple of games. He's on like a 3-game goal streak, something like that. I'm sure, for the Jets, this was a much needed sort of break from the usual chaos. Obviously, this year's been all over the place. And I think, despite the fact that we're all still on Team Tank, the thing that I always come back to is these are still people, right? And you don't want them to get into a position where all they know is defeat. That's not healthy for anyone. It starts to create some very uncomfortable locker room vibes. And I think for the Jets, winning a couple of games here and there really isn't the worst thing. Is it ideal? No, of course not. I think we all, for the good of the tank, want the Jets to be as close to last in the NHL as possible. But there is a little bit of a secret, right? Just because you finish last doesn't mean you actually get first overall. You have a reasonably high chance of actually falling to one of the 2 other picks in the top 3. So, I think it's nice to imagine the Jets being at the very bottom and having the highest possible odds for a lottery first overall, but it's not necessary. As long as the Jets pick somewhere in the top 4 or 5, they're guaranteed something really, really good, a game-changing player. Now, there are some potential pitfalls for them, but, that's probably a question we'll talk about a little bit closer to the date. As far as the 4-game win streak is concerned, it's not going to be the kind that really pushes the Jets into a playoff spot. They are still 8 points out of a wild card spot, and that is absent of a couple of games that are actually finishing up just in a few minutes, including Utah versus Dallas and Calgary against Chicago. So, that whole playoff push, obviously we have some thoughts about that. Probably a little too early to suspend the tank. But for the Jets, obviously beating up on the Wild was probably a great feeling. Minnesota has had a couple of wins against the Jets for the first time in years. It took years, literally, for this team to lose to Minnesota. And now the Jets have gotten their own answer in the same season. Nice to see Winnipeg basically play about 12 minutes of actual hockey, or maybe 8 minutes of actual hockey in the first period. And they went up 3-0 against the Minnesota team that until that point had been dominating them. And then, of course, the Jets decided, we like scoring some goals. There were some bad penalties from the Wild, and that just seemingly cascaded into a huge walloping where the Jets finished the night 6-2. We even saw guys like Pearson and Stanley getting on the goal scoring sheet. Stanley with an absolute peach of a snipe. Really, just play the dude at wing. He's not great at defending, so have him do the one thing that he does better than anything else, and that is shooting the puck, man. Very clearly, he has a sniper's aim. Scheifele also added a beautiful snipe of his own. By the way, 4-point night for him. And given the mounting injuries, to some of the guys who have already been selected for Team Canada, maybe, just maybe, he's still got a little bit of hope to actually become a selection if maybe a Braden Point isn't able to make it. So, Team Canada, Mark Scheifele, not necessarily written off just yet. If he finds a way to sneak onto that roster, I think a lot of us would be pretty dang happy for him, right? That'd be like for the crap sandwich that the season has been, a very nice little treat. Jonathan Toews, also kind of making a case for his name to really be one of the bigger trade pieces out there from this Jets team. You know, ever since he moved to this line with Velarde and Perfetti, his goal scoring and points production has taken a huge jump. And I think it's at a level to where, you know, earlier in the year, you might have thought Winnipeg would be lucky to even move his contract for anything, let alone a lower round pick. He might actually command a trade package by the deadline. So we'll have to keep an eye on that, right? Toews is obviously committed to Winnipeg and very happy to be a member of this team. But you know what? Like, he's also 37, and he probably doesn't want to be on a second to last place team in one of his final years of NHL stardom. So maybe he is open to a move. At least that's what the Winnipeg Sports Talk folks were saying earlier this week. So, you know, that could be something that's very beneficial for both parties. The Jets get a nice couple of pieces potentially to help rebuild this prospect pool out, and Toews gets to go chase one last ring, right? Probably, you know, a little bittersweet for some fans, but I think for what the Jets need, this could be very beneficial. But otherwise, you know what? Winnipeg's going to be happy with the game just as is. I'm sure they needed a couple of wins here. Things were starting to feel more than a little dour. I'm sure Scott Arniel is having, you know, the time of his life right now after losing 11 straight. He survived that stretch. Now he gets a couple of wins under his belt. Will the team go on a big winning streak? No, I don't think that we have to worry about that too much. Some of the teams the Jets have beaten in the stretch are what I would like to call very messy. You know, New Jersey, LA, Minnesota apparently has become a little messier the past couple of games. That's a thing that's actually happening. So, you know, the Jets are kind of an interesting company in this part of the schedule. A lot of the teams that they are playing have seemingly had, you know, maybe their own wings clipped out from underneath them. So Winnipeg, you know, is still very much who they are, and that is not likely to change. But you know what? Like I said, winning a few games here and there isn't the worst thing. I know a lot of you are going to be upset that they're winning too many games, and on a win streak, I wouldn't stress out too much. I'm going to talk a little bit later on this episode about why that is, and kind of, you know, spotlight how hard it is to make up ground this year. This is a season where once you are in a hole, it is very, very hard to dig yourselves out of it. And I think for the Jets, that's probably the best news you could possibly ask for. You know, winning some games and still being far back of the pack is probably the best way to approach this thing. You pump up some trade values, you keep spirits at least reasonably high relative to expectations, and, you know, you set yourself up for, hopefully, by the end of this year, a franchise-altering lottery sort of pick. So, long way to go, but you know what? The end of this season is coming closer to our horizon. We're starting to see a little bit of out there. We're getting closer, right? And for the Jets, just find a way to make it to the end of the season. Keep things, you know, relatively intact without losing your heads. You know, come back stronger next year with a little bit more experience, a little bit more youth, and hopefully a big draft pick to help set this team up for a bright, bright future. Now, speaking of bright futures, I want to talk about some of the youth that I think will have an impact on this team going forward. One of them played in tonight's game against Minnesota, Elias Salomonsson. He did pretty well, and I think that there is something to be said about a guy like him helping to take over the Jets' right side in the very near future. But before we dive into that, wanted to chat a little bit about our friends at Indeed. If you've ever hired somebody who looked good on paper but wasn't the right fit, you know how important that is. When you want candidates who truly match what you're looking for, trust Indeed sponsored jobs. Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed sponsored jobs puts your post at the top of the page and helps you reach the right candidates faster. For somebody like me who was looking for work several years ago, I've used Indeed myself. I can tell you that their resume builder is comprehensive and even spotlights different things like your work experiences, your salary requirements, and even any special certifications or unique traits or things that you bring that other employees maybe don't. And this is where, as a company that's hiring, this is your chance to find some of the best candidates. I got matched to positions almost immediately, and Indeed does a great job of helping businesses find better employees faster. Sponsored jobs boosts your post to the right people who are the best match for your role, and that makes a huge difference. Indeed's data shows that sponsored job posts on Indeed are 90% more likely to report a hire than non-sponsored jobs. Spend more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes with less stress, less time, and more results using Indeed sponsored jobs. Listeners of this show get a $75 sponsored job credit to help give your job the premium placement it deserves at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support the show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Do it the right way with Indeed. Hey, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us as we were chatting a little bit about, the youth turn that the Jets are going to have to experience over the next couple of seasons. We are kind of entering the twilight of this current Jets core, and I think for a lot of Jets fans, there's a real clamor for kids, right? And I think for the Jets in particular, there's been a real desire to see more young players starting to step into this roster. Now, the timing of how this is all going to work could be tricky, right? We're in a weird spot where it's hard to say that I have a clear vision for just how many youth players are going to make it to the Jets, especially in a short time frame. You're going to have to account for some guys who are going to come in here over the next 2 to 3 years, make the moose, and maybe kind of pop in and out, maybe struggling a little bit at some levels. We have lots of prospects that we like, but maybe not all of them are going to be stud NHLers or even pro level players to start. So in terms of guys that I'm pretty hyped about for, the Jets, obviously one has just been getting some ice time for the Jets blue line, and that is Elias Salomonsson. He already had a stint earlier this year where I thought he had a couple of okay shifts, nothing too crazy, but that was sort of expected when at the time the Jets blue line was very injured. We had guys kind of coming in and out in different roles, and there was a fair bit of change. Salomonsson against Minnesota looked a lot more of the kind of player that I think has a real chance to play in Winnipeg's top four sometime in the next 2 to 3 years. I think DeMello is very much slowing down. In fact, he's just kind of becoming bad. It's hit a lot faster than I think I was expecting, and it was one of those scenarios when he got extended a couple seasons ago that it was a little bit of a concern, right? As much as I love Dylan, and he's been one of the real standout acquisitions the Jets have made over the past several years, he's in his early 30s and he's slowing down. And it's been hard for him to play at the pace that, being on the first pairing with Morrissey kind of requires. He is, a solid second or third pairing guy who's being asked to be, a number 2. And at this stage of his career, it's not really working out. He was this guy earlier, right? He was a great defensive safety valve, a really solid two-way defender, and very underrated. But now in his 30s, things have started to shift. Salomonsson may not have to wait too long to eventually take on that mantle of being Morrissey's partner. We've already seen him do it in a couple of shifts this season. It makes me think the Jets are relatively high on Salo, and they want him to become a top 4 defender sooner than later. Tonight he was paired with Dylan Sandberg, which is a lot of trust. I thought that they were going to put him with Stanley, but they put him all the way with, Sandberg, who's one of our most important defenders. And you know what? I thought Salomonsson played a very clean game. Good outlet passes. I thought he skated under pressure well, and he moved the puck effectively. He even had a couple of moments where he jumped into offensive rushes and led some transitions. So I mean, that's really what you ask for in a young rookie. And with Salo having such eye-popping early numbers in the AHL, especially in his rookie year, there is clearly some jump there, whether it's his vision and passing, maybe that shot that's going to eventually start to find its way through traffic. All that kind of stuff, I think, is something that Jets fans should be, pretty excited about. So, as far as Winnipeg is concerned, right, Salo is probably one of the prized pigs. In a second tier, you might look at a Braden Yeager. I think Yeager's potentially going to fight for a roster spot next year. Braden, the scoring hasn't exactly been popping over the last few weeks, and that seems to be pretty consistent across the board for the Moose. You see a lot of like really veteran Manitoba players, especially guys like DiGiuseppe, Anderson Dolan, Fagemo. None of these dudes are posting above like 15 to 16 points. Fagemo has like 18? And this is a guy who had like at least twice that or even 3 times that last year. So I think there's something funky with Manitoba's offense. It's why I'm not reading too much into the Moose scoring. I mean, pretty much everyone across the board has seemingly taken a real dive. Chibrikov and Lambert are scuffling along right now. Lambert still has like 7 points in 21 games, which is not super impressive, if we're being honest. But then you look at like Yeager, who's got like 14 points, and that's coming in 34 games. So you kind of have to read a little bit more between the lines on what's happening with this team and where offense has kind of gone to die. So with that in mind, having watched Yeager, I think he's defensively very smart. I think his two-way game is very smart. He's got a nice shot, and he's got good edge work. I could see him coming into a depth role next year, especially, with the Jets kind of looking for some sort of center support, right? They're not going to be able to trade for a 2C is my guess. And if they draft a guy in this upcoming draft that's in the top 3 or top 4, most of those dudes are wingers. And I would expect, a McKenna or a Stenberg, if the Jets land one of those two, to be deployed out wide. I don't think either of those are likely to be NHL centers anytime in the near future. So the Jets are going to have to look perhaps more inwardly in that. And Yeager could be a guy who, slides into a middle six center role. I'm not sure if that's where they see him or if they think he's more of a winger, but it's something I would at least want to investigate. He's not the tallest player and he's not the most physical, so I do understand why there may be some hesitance there, but I think Yeager has a real chance to be a very impactful player and a guy that I think is a little bit of a sleeper pick for the Jets pool. He has kind of fallen under the radar just because, Walton and Salomonson have certainly had their star studs really showing in this pool, but Yeager is not a name to forget about. The last guy that I think might be worth chatting about, at least in passing, is Danny Zhilkin. Zhilkin, I think, is a guy who's going to be a nice fourth liner. He's already been given a run of games with the Jets this year. I think he's got some real pop and jump to his game. He is likely to fill in next season, is my guess. Perhaps even this year once they start selling at the deadline. I do still maintain that the Jets are going to have to sell. I'm really not expecting anything otherwise, but I think Zhilkin has a real chance to get some runway and potentially be a really solid depth option for Winnipeg. I don't know if the scoring is necessarily going to be there, but in terms of the work rates, in terms of the creativity, the skating, the constant motor, like it's all the fourth liney kind of stuff that a team would adore. And I think in my mind, Zhilkin is a perfect archetype of that energetic bottom six guy who brings that spark, who can be, relentless and create some offense. Maybe, if he's very fortunate, he comes out with like, I would say like a 20-point season at some point in the NHL. I think that would be pretty nice. So Winnipeg certainly has a real chance to get some depth guys out of this unit. I think the pool certainly lacks top-end players, and that's always going to be a bit of an issue, but perhaps by the end of the season, we are singing a very different tune when a top 5 pick enters Winnipeg's system. So help's on the way. I think that is the biggest takeaway. Help is on the way. It might take a little bit to reach up to top speed, but I do think there are some guys who are going to help the Jets as soon as next season. But curious to know if there are any prospects you really are excited about. Let me know in the comments below or at my social medias on Twitter. In just a little bit, I also want to chat about whether it's really worth the Jets pushing for a playoff spot, because Obviously, with them on a 4-game win streak and, teams perhaps not being super consistent, there is a chance for them to get into that wild card. And is it worth it, right? Can they actually make up that ground? Is there a way for them to do it? We'll chat about that coming right up. The wild card round is here, and FanDuel is officially in playoff mode. Every game day during the NFL playoffs, FanDuel is giving customers even more ways to get in on the action. Right now, every NFL playoff game day, FanDuel users get a profit boost pack waiting for them inside the app. You'll find this multiple profit boost pack giving you edges and everything from player stats to whatever it is that you want to juice your bets on. Obviously, for those of you who are Bears fans, you're probably watching Caleb Williams and his fourth quarter heroics. Maybe you think he's got something special in the next fourth quarter. Well, this is your chance to juice that bet. Or maybe you think that perhaps the 49ers are truly the Super Bowl favorites. Put your bet on the 49ers, and you could juice that with a profit boost. You make your picks, then apply your profit boosts to go after even bigger payouts while the playoffs get rolling. So visit FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL, and grab your profit boost pack every NFL playoff game day. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Everydayers, thank you so much for rejoining us as we're chatting a little bit about, obviously the standing situation for the Jets. And I see some folks kind of chatting back and forth about, Winnipeg maybe not really giving up, certainly not on the season, and guys still being bought into this team and all that. And I appreciate that. I don't really hate the idea that the team hasn't yet quit in some ways. I mean this more for the players than I do for the front office. The front office should kind of know where this Jets team is in the grand scheme of things. As of right now, Winnipeg is still 9th in the wild card race, and they are just about 31st in the NHL. So they're pretty far down, right? Now, the difference between them and like maybe a couple of positions up is about 2 to 3 points. Obviously they are 1 point behind the Flames and Blues. And then, the Hawks are just 2 points above them. So some of the results tonight were a little bit helpful. Calgary winning their game. We saw Utah win their game, which is better for Utah to kind of keep that second wild card spot. That leaves the Jets 7 points out right now, which is not insurmountable when you look at the standings, but it's also the fact that you have to leapfrog, like 6-7 teams to get there. Pushing for the playoffs, I understand what Winnipeg is imagining, right? A lot of teams ahead of you are mediocre. All you have to do is get in, and anything can happen. More importantly for the Jets, they're going to look at this financially and say that a game or two of home playoff revenue is exactly what they desire, right? It's the thing that they have to have. They're going to prioritize that gate revenue above many other things. But the problem for the Jets, in my mind, and what they're not necessarily thinking about or really willing to accept, is that the long run is going to be very bad if they do this. The Jets can't really afford to screw up this tank. And I say this with all the love in my heart. It is very crucial that the Jets come away this year with a big prospect. If they do not, and somehow they slip into the middle of the first round, or heaven forbid they even make the playoffs, for one thing, that playoff run is going to be extremely short. You'll get that game or two of home revenue, and then you are out, because there is absolutely no way that they're surviving either one of Colorado, or more likely even, the Vegas Golden Knights, if they somehow were to manage to get themselves into the first wild card. That's the best that they could really hope for, is a date with either the Oilers or Vegas. And, considering Edmonton has McDrysaitel and has gone to the Cup Finals twice in the last 2 years, and Vegas is a team the Jets have never beaten in the playoffs, what hope do you have of actually doing anything in the playoffs, right? Clearly, postseason success is not top of mind for the Jets. And I think that's kind of been one of the issues with this team, is that they don't always understand how to get the squad into a better position. So there's that angle. And I also just think that for the Jets, right, what they would have to give up in order to get themselves some real support for this team just doesn't feel like it's worth it. Right now, you really should not be shopping your first round pick. You shouldn't be shopping any assets unless you're just trying to maybe make a bit of a change, like a Brad Lambert out for some sort of other prospect or something in. But I think Winnipeg would be deceiving itself if it thinks it has a real chance at going on a run and repeating what the Blues did several years ago when they were, back of the pack and then stormed back all the way for a cup run. That's just not the kind of thing that's a real sustainable model. And if the Jets were to do it, hey, amazing. And I look like an idiot. But we've seen a lot of teams try and come back from very bad starts. The Blues did it last year. And you know what the Blues got out of it? A first round exit in horrific fashion to the Jets. 1.6. You were there. I was there. We all saw it. So I think for Winnipeg, the important thing right now is to think about the future. Make sure that you're planning for the next phase of this core. More than anything, that is what can set you up for success. Trying to push for the playoffs, trying to storm your way back. I know they're not going to say that they've given up on the season until it's way towards the end of the year and they really have no choice. But I think they know that there's just too much ground to cover. The Jets have gone on a 4-game win streak and are still in 31st position in the NHL. They have closed the gap a bit to some of the teams above them, but not by very much, and not to a sustainable level to where you really feel like they're an actual playoff contender. No, they are still one of the last place teams in the league. Now, at this point, the only question is, how far back are they going to finish the year? I still think that they will be at least bottom 5. That's my prediction. I think it's going to be very hard for them to outpace some of the squads above them, just because some of those teams have more talent and they've more consistently put together results. For some reason, the Flames keep winning some random games here and there. I don't know how that's happened. I look at Calgary and I'm kind of amazed by it, but the Flames, the Blues, those teams have managed to pile together enough results to where there is still a slight gap. But is that going to maintain? We'll have to kind of keep an eye out. Some of those teams above the Jets really are worse in some ways, but the Jets kind of had some really poor luck in some ways when they had their 11-game losing streak, and so that hole has already been dug. But hopefully Winnipeg doesn't read too much into this and try and get this team into the postseason. I think that would be the biggest mistake they could possibly make. They really need to stay committed to what they're doing right now. Just ride this wave and see where it takes you. Don't push for the postseason. Don't try and get in. That is not going to help this team in the near or future term. Your best bet is to come away with the big franchise-altering draft pick that can give you something not only for the coming season, but a piece that helps you in the many years to come. If you're focused on attendance and revenue, getting that exciting brand new young prospect onto your roster that can have a Celebrini-like effect would do so much more for this franchise than 2 or 3 games of home playoff revenue. But love to hear your thoughts on this. Do you agree, or are you starting to think the Jets should make that playoff run? Drop your thoughts and comments below in the YouTube section or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at @LO_Winnipeg Jets on Twitter. For tonight's episode, though, that's going to be all the time that we have. I thank you so much for listening to Locked On Jets. Tomorrow's episode, I kind of want to talk about some big trade things because obviously Logan Stanley's name is coming up recently and the Jets might have had some recent extension talks. I want to talk about why that cannot happen for this team and what needs to occur going forward. But we'll see you then. Have a great night. And as always, go Jets go.